Hello, Trig class. Let's look at these problems from 7.2 right triangle trig, and we're going to start off with just some of the most fundamental, very important trig identities that you'll need to know as we move through the semester. Now, I will post this so you guys can look at this to help you initially, but you are going to need to know all of these formulas for the midterm and the final. Right? That is not a requirement of me, that is a requirement of AB Tech, and you are not allowed to have this formula sheet on the midterm or the final. So you're going to need, I would make like a bunch of note cards with these. You can find them online as well, with these things on the front and their identities on the back, and be able to go through and do that for all of these, because you're going to need it for all of these. So the ones that we're going to use on this one in particular are these cofunction formulas. All right, we're going to need those. We're going to need the Pythagorean identities here, in particular the very first one, sine squared cosine squared equals 1. And we're going to need these reciprocal identities right here. In particular, the reciprocal of secant is 1 over cosine. The reciprocal of cosecant is sine. So those are the ones that we're going to need. And again, reciprocal just means you flip the fraction over. So 1 over the sine is the same thing as flipping the value of the sine over. All right, something that you can get from the unit circle here as well are just the values of the radian measures in relation to the corresponding degree measures. So 30 degrees, pi over 6 radians, 60 degrees, pi over 3 radians. So all of that stuff will come together when we're going through and doing this problem. All right, so let's start off. The cosine of 30 degrees is given to us. That's square root of 3 over 2. I can also get that from the unit circle. The cosine of 30 degrees, there's 30 degrees, is the x-coordinate there. So there's the square root of 3 over 2. That's where that's coming from. But once I have that, to get the sine of 60 degrees, I'm using this cofunction property right here. Right? The sine of 60 is complementary to 30 degrees, meaning that 60 is 90 minus 30. So that means that this sine of 60 is the same thing as the cosine of 30. So this 60 degrees is the sine of 60 is also the square root of 3 over 2. All right, there's the fraction button. In the numerator, I'm going to put the square root and then 3 underneath that, and then the denominator, just put the 2. All right, so that is the cofunction property that gets us sine of 60 from the cosine of 30. All right, if basically you're going from cofunction to just the function, or vice versa, if the two numbers as the inputs add up to 90, then you get the same output. So what I mean by that is if this had said the sine of 40 is a number, then the cosine of 50 is that same number. So sine, cosine, right, one of them has the co, the other one doesn't, and then the two numbers add up to 90. Right, that would be the same as secant and cosecant, tangent, cotangent. Those are cofunctions, and they have that property that you get the same output if the inputs sum to 90 degrees or pi over 2 radians. What we see in that trig cheat sheet. Pi over 2 is the same thing as 90 degrees, but this is the radian version of those formulas. All right, the next one here is using sine squared of 30. Notice we have cosine of 30, and we want to find sine squared of 30. Right, so that means that we're going to be using Pythagorean identity, in particular this first one, sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. If sine squared plus cosine squared is equal to 1, well then sine squared is 1 minus cosine squared. So we're going to square the cosine of 30. We're going to subtract that from 1, and that will give us the sine squared of 30. So sine squared of 30 is a quarter, 1/4. And then the next one has us find secant of pi over 6. So this is using a couple of them. Number one, it's using that pi over 6 is the same thing as 30 degrees, so we're at the same value. And that secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So we flip over the square root of 3 over 2. That'll give us 2 over the square root of 3. If I flip this over and put a 2 on top and the square root of 3 on the bottom, I think that this author accepts that, and it does. All right, so you're just flipping this fraction over. Cosine and secant are reciprocals. So flipping the fraction over gives me the value. All right, now cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So that's the first thing. This is no longer the reciprocal of this anymore. It's the reciprocal of sine. But also 60 degrees is the same thing again as pi over 3 radians. So you can see here on the unit circle there's 60 degrees, pi over 3 radians. So those are equivalent angle measures. And so now I'm just flipping over my answer to part A. But my answer to part A was the same thing I had here. So my answer to part D is the same as my answer to part C. Again, that cofunction property, secant and cosecant are cofunctions. Pi over 6 plus pi over 3 is pi over 2. So those end up giving us the same value. So that'll be a 2 on the bottom. That'll be a square root of 3. And that is how we can use these trig identities from this trig cheat sheet, along with a little bit of understanding of radian measure and degree measure to get those 4 values.